Yep, we are now live.
Okay. Right, good morning, welcome, and welcome to those that might be watching this on stream. Welcome to our visitors. I've got Paul Cottington from the NFU and Jill Matthew, who, should we say, manages the Gloucestershire Rural Estate, or at least I'll ask her to confirm that when we speak to her. Welcome both.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair, and everyone else.
Right, I just in case people have just clicked on, we have no Don Morris and we have no Nick House. What I was going to do, for the benefit of Paul and Jill, can we just run round and perhaps explain to our visitors which areas of Gloucestershire we represent? Can I start with Paul Hodgkinson, who's really, how should we say, he orchestrated this whole look at rivers and pollution. So I'll start with Paul. You introduce yourself, Paul, and then I'll go to David and then Kate.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Paul Hodgkinson, leader of the Lib Dem group on Gloucestershire County Council, and I represent Bourton-on-the-Water and North Leach, which includes the rivers Windrush and Leach, both of which have had quite heavy pollutants from Thames water. And as has been said by Phil, I put a motion up to the council, I think it was about 16 months ago, calling for this to be set up. So, yeah, that's me. Thank you.
David?
So I'm David Willingham. I am a councillor for St Mark's and St Peter's in Cheltenham. So the river that runs through the division I represent is the River Chelt, and it's obviously affected by the tributaries upstream of where I am. Most of the issues I've probably got in my area relate to sewage rather than agriculture, but I know that there is some agriculture further upstream, so certainly of interest. And if you take a wider county view, the Severn and the Wye obviously are huge rivers, and there's a lot of concern I know about the River Wye. So, yeah, that's.
Thanks, David. Kate, good morning.
Chair, good morning, everybody else. I'm Kate Cody. I'm the leader of the Green Group at Gloucestershire County Council, and I'm the councillor here in Tewkesbury, where we have, the Severn and the Avon meet. And obviously, the usual things, sewage, agriculture, and plastics. Thank you.
Graham.
Yeah, good morning, Paul. Councillor Graham Morgan from Siniford and Orsadine, and also on the Boy Valley AONB for the county.
Dom, I see you've joined us.
Morning, Chair. Morning, all. Don Morris, County Councillor in Fairfield, Lechlade, Sir Harry. I'm on the banks of the Colne Foot since 1959.
Stephen.
Fairfield is a real issue in terms of sewage discharge, 1 hour and 4.
Yeah. Yeah, you're buffering a bit, Dom, so it might pay you to take your screen down and stay on just audio. Stephen, good morning.
People say that to me all the time.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Stephen Hurst. I represent the Tetbury division of the County Council, which stretches from Frampton Mansell all the way up to Didmartin, a very large area, very agricultural in parts, with water treatment plants dotted all the way through the division. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Sue, I think you're on mute. Sue Williams, I can't hear you. Oh. Get no audio at all.
There, Chair, a mute button showing green.
Yeah, yeah. She's talking away. I can see that. Yeah. Yeah.
Worth checking the audio settings on your computer to make sure the microphone isn't completely turned down.
Okay.
There's a little sound thing probably in the bottom right toolbar that you might find something that have muted it, or look for the audio settings, see if that works.
Thanks, David. We'll push on. Right. In opening up, Paul, you can introduce yourself. I believe you're doing a presentation, and Jill is observing from, if you like, the GCC perspective. Welcome, and thank you for what you sent in advance.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to share a presentation. I think I've got 15 minutes to go through it, and it's a massive topic, agriculture and water quality, and I think a kind of a starter for 10 in all of this is agriculture is going through probably its greatest ever change that it has had probably almost in its entire history, or certainly in my time of doing all of this kind of work for the last 30 odd years. So I'm going to put a little bit of context around it, and hopefully that will help. And basically, if I can stimulate the right questions from you guys, that will be what I'm after to help go through all of this. So, right, I've got to share my content. So, open system preferences, apparently. Oh, crikey. Hold on. Share. Grant access. Right, didn't know I had to do this. There we go. Right. I am not sure I can now share on this. Bear with me. It's asked me to put in some sort of a change on here within my system preferences. It's not allowing me to just easily share, I'm afraid, Chair. Let's see.
Did you want to ping it over to me on email and I can share it for you, Paul?
You can. Right, let's see if we can do that, shall we? Right, apologies for this.
The downside of technology, eh?
One of them. Amongst a fair few. Right, here we go. Press. Right, let me see if I can upload this. Whilst that is doing its thing, it's uploading. I happen to live my sins, and we don't have the greatest. We don't have your 300 gigabytes worth of broadband speed down in this little bit. So I work as the environment advisor for the Southwest for the National Farmers Union. I cover all 6 counties for the Southwest. I've been doing this role now for about 14 years, and when I joined, I must admit, I thought I came from the Regional Development Agency where I'd helped write the Rural Development Programme. And my previous background is working in wildlife trusts and whatnot, community development as well. And I must admit, I came to the NFU thinking I was going to be doing birds and bees and wildlife and, you know, the kind of things that I'd trained up as being an ecologist for. In actual fact, for the last 14 years, the majority of my focus has been around water quality sort of issues and soil issues. And that has been whether that is helping our members with individual problems. So I work with farmers who will contact us because they've got some sort of an enforcement proceeding against them from the Environment Agency, or I will help them because I lead on all things environment, land use and planning. So on things like planning, so where they have to put in new slurry storage and things like that. So as far as I'm concerned, water quality is the biggest topic I have. And that kind of goes to the extent of I'm currently leading on a project over in Poole Harbour, which is around developing a nutrient trading scheme, which is directly linked to reducing nutrients coming from farms into a protected area. So Sophie, hopefully you've now got my presentation. It's pinged across.
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose the kind of starter for what's happening in agriculture is one, kind of context side of things is the Common Agricultural Policy has gone. And so we now have the Agriculture Act, and all of the funding support is moving across to public cash for public goods. So a focus on things like natural capital and environment. And so there is a massive change that is happening in terms of how all of the schemes and support into agriculture works. And a thing to note is that 58% of all farms rely on what's called the basic payment scheme as a support, financial support, in order to remain, I'm going to say profitable rather than viable, because I think, you know, there's viability is quite a broad thing. But in terms of for agriculture, the basic payment scheme is critical for over 50% of all farms, and that support system is going over the next few years, and in 2024 all farms will have 50% of their current payments that they receive. So farmers are having to work out how they're going to adjust their incomes. At the same time, the current support through what we call environmental schemes, something like the Countryside Stewardship Scheme that's in existence, that's being phased out and will be replaced by what's called the Environmental Land Management Scheme. And that is all currently being worked out at the moment. There are various pilots, and the point to note is that the payment levels that will come through for all of that will be less than is currently there. You should also note that farmers are about 75%, I think it's probably slightly lower than that, maybe 70% are in an environmental scheme of some sort. And that's a general kind of point across the country, and would certainly be the same across Gloucestershire. So the support system is changing. The other thing to really note, and in fact, Sophie, if you get the presentation now, don't worry about it, because I think I'll just talk to you guys. It's slightly easier that way, yeah. The other thing to note is that the way all our trading is changing. So we're not who we go to in terms of, you know, previously it was a lot easier going to the EU, but other trading arrangements are coming into place. So there's an awful lot of discussion within the sector around what are called standards. Yeah, and so in this country we have very high environmental standards, and as farmers want to work to having good standards, because actually it's kind of part of our USP, is what we do. Now, a number of those standards are underpinned by assurance schemes and by the supply chain itself, but also they're underpinned by regulations. So an awful lot of what I do around the water quality world is linked to the regulations that sit there. The crucial ones to note for you folk regarding water quality are linked in the main towards what's done through the Environment Agency. And I believe you've spoken with the Environment Agency already? Yeah? Okay. So the bits that are of greatest interest to us is, one, farmers are not required by law to not cause or knowingly pollute any watercourse. Okay, so that's kind of the standard thing that runs through everything, and that sits within the Water Resources Act, and that's underpinned by things like the environmental permitting regulations. So that's kind of a standard thing. So part of what I do within my role, and one of the things we help advise our members around in the wider agricultural sector, is how to avoid having pollution incidents. And when there is an issue, often we will be the first person that the farmers come to, and in which case we explain how all of the laws and things work for them. And I think a little bit of context is, you know, the farming business itself is incredibly complex. And I mean, for my sins, I've got a Master of Law within environmental law, and I do this as for my living, and I'm still damned if I can remember all the bits and pieces that are supposed to go with all of this. And it's what we have to do is trying to help all of those farmers understand in a very clear way what is required. So often when there's an issue, they will come to us to help explain what the Environment Agency wants and what they need to do. So we act as that kind of little bit of a babel fish around things. So we have this wider thing around pollution. You then have much more specific rules. So there's one which for us is easy to trip off the tongue, SAFO. For the rest of the world will be yet another acronym, which is the Silage and Slurry Agricultural Fuels Order of 1991. And that is a requirement where all farmers are supposed to essentially keep their infrastructure in a standard which does not cause a significant risk to the environment. So there are certain requirements around, for example, a silage clamp that is supposed to have perimeter drains and things like that, and people aren't allowed to just put one up without getting permission from the Environment Agency. So there is a built-in requirement that there is sign off for new structures goes to the Environment Agency. So we have a whole chunk of time helping advise our members around what happens with regulations like that. And I'm going to come back to the SAFO regulations at the end of this. The other one to note is nitrate vulnerable zones. So an awful lot of the farms in your area will be covered by, or there are a number of patches across Gloucestershire which are covered by nitrate vulnerable zones. Now they're identified where the watercourses have more than 11.3 milligrams of nitrate per litre. Yeah, and there is evidence to show for agriculture that agriculture has a part to play in it. There are different rules when it comes to eutrophic water bodies where there's algae. Okay, so for groundwaters and rivers, there is this target number. So there's a number of patches within your county which are covered by this, and so the farmers in there are required to do nutrient management. They're required to have additional slurry storage, and they're required to meet certain crop requirements for nitrates across their farm. The next one to come across to is the Farming Rules for Water, which has got another name which I'm going to forget off the top of my head, but the Agricultural Diffuse Pollution Regulations or something like that. I'm probably missing a couple of words around it. That was brought in 2018, has about 8 rules in it. A number of them are linked to pollution events, so preventing runoff and things like that, and compaction. There is a very important one which is called Rule 1, Regulation 4, which is linked to the farmer making sure that they meet the crop requirements for all of their crops. And so where any field is cultivated, and there is a definition for cultivation, the farmer is required to do soil sampling. And they're supposed to, and they check it across all of the main nutrients there, and then their crops are supposed to have the requisite amount of nutrients put on to meet that crop requirement. Okay, and that is having a pretty profound impact across the sector because the rules are changing. The understanding of how it is all being applied is changing. And so the sector is having to adjust to how it meets those requirements. And it will have an impact on how some farmers are able to apply slurry to a field, because traditionally they might have applied slurry, but if there's a high phosphate indices on there, they're not allowed to put it on there, which will mean for them, that farmer will have to find a new place for the slurry to go to export it to. Obviously, all of this has to be recorded. And if they can't do that, or even if they can, they might well need new slurry storage. Okay, so the final bit I'm going to come to, because I realise I've been about 12 minutes or so to give plenty of questions, is this kind of interaction between what happens with what the farmer needs to do, and then part of what happens within the world that you guys folk are manage around the planning side of things. So one of the things that happens is the Environment Agency will go out and they will make an inspection on the farm, either because they do a random inspection or there's been a pollution incident or something like that. And there could be a requirement for the farmer to put in a new slurry store. At the point at which they put in a new slurry store, one, it's a betterment, for the want of a better way of expressing that. So it will be reducing the risk of nutrients going into the environment and reducing the risk of pollution. Now, one of the issues that we're now finding is that when the farmer goes to put in that planning application, for their mind, it's all a betterment. They're actually going to have less ammonia emissions coming off of that side. There's going to be less direct pollution coming off of the ground, etc., and better use of nutrients, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to use them as efficiently and effectively as possible. one of the problems is that the farmer in some areas where they're close to a triple SI, site of special scientific interest, will be required to do a scale assessment, which is looking at the combustible or materials that I forget what it is in terms of the acronym, what it means, but it's to do with ammonia emissions coming off of the farm and their impact they could have on a sensitive receptor site, the triple SI. Now, the issue there is that the triple SI, if it, it's something like a graveyard with, nice mosses and lichens, is particularly sensitive to ammonia. And that's fine. And so actually there needs to be a limit in terms of what can be, how much can go onto that. Now, the problem is that the farmer is currently at a level up here in terms of ammonia emissions. Their proposed actions are actually reducing the ammonia emissions that will go to the site. But because the bar for the site itself is much lower in terms of the threshold for what it can accept, the farmer is often finding that they will have their planning application refused. Yeah, and so that is as a result of the fact that the site itself, the triple SI, can't take an enlarged quantity of ammonia, even though the farm itself is now producing a lot less and the environmental impact is a lot less. And I suppose the point for raising this is there is a complex interaction between how all of these things go together. I suppose my final kind of remarks on all of this are, one, farmers, the NFU, all take water quality exceptionally seriously. We put it into our magazines and provide an awful lot of guidance. We work with the Environment Agency and NGOs in terms of helping provide advice and guidance, helping run schemes. We're also looking at innovative schemes like we are down in Poole Harbour. And we're also, just looking in general to increase the awareness and the ways in which farmers can make reductions. So perhaps if I leave that there and then come across to you folk for some questions. And apologies that I didn't have my system preferences set up in order to enable sharing.
Thank you, Paul. And I wouldn't worry about not having the PowerPoint presentations. I think I found that probably as interesting as anything you would have possibly put up in the presentation anyway. I'm open to members then. Firstly, questions to Paul or expansion on anything that he said. I'm looking for hands, but a wave at the screen will probably suit me better. David Willingham. Yeah, Willingham, sorry. Willingham, indeed.
That's good. I keep getting that. Someone else has managed to do that on an email yesterday, so don't worry. I'm used to all manner of variants. So thank you very much for the presentation. That was actually really informative. I think it's quite complicated, especially for people like me that are not actually actively involved in farming and agriculture. The sort of nearest I get is trying to grow vegetables in my back garden. So considerably a different scale. I know from reading the media that farmers are under a lot of financial pressure. I know from my work with Cleve Common Trust that they rely on funding sources that were things like the Common Agricultural Policy. Obviously, trying to invest in facilities that take sludge off of that take sludge, slurry, what have you, and make sure that things are balanced out correctly, whether it's through infrastructure or whether it's through technology that's going onto the farm, onto like farm equipment, is likely to be really expensive and what have you. So what sort of support is there out there for the farming communities to actually make this transition? Because if you've got businesses that have got pretty slim margins and we're asking them to invest more money than they can afford, then to change the sort of pollution outlook, then we have to have money to, that money has to come from somewhere, and you can't just put them out of business because that isn't, you know, so what sort of funding is there for farmers from central government in terms of grants or loans or other financing to actually make the changes to the technology, to the infrastructure to do this?
Would you like me to, shall I answer that? I mean, kind of starter for 10 is that where it's difficult for a number of areas of law to get funding from the government because it's polluter pays principle. Yeah, so the farmer is required to make those investments. So where it is for things like slurry storage, the farmer will be required to find their own source of investment for it. And there is a new slurry investment scheme coming along, and that will be to enable farmers to go beyond the regulatory requirements. So having support from government and any other sources around at all is absolutely crucial. Just to put a little bit of context, I think people will always say things like, you know, some crops are perhaps slightly more emblematic of risk than others, and maize is one of those. And folk will go, right, okay, stop growing maize. But from a farmer's perspective, in order to stop growing maize, there are a number of things that have to change in order to be able to get to that. And that could involve how they do their calving, what they do in terms of where they will get the rest of their feed from, etc., etc. We did some analysis around this, and, you know, starter for 10, farmers must meet regulatory requirements. Yeah. Issue is that slurry store might cost £100,000 to put in. A slurry separator might be £20,000 plus. Putting a cover over one of these things also costs a considerable amount of money. There is some, well, there hopefully will be some funding support around that. What is kind of critical, certainly from my point of view, is that the starter for 10 is that the right thing to be doing in that business? And so there is this kind of need for actually getting someone in to help with the farmer to look at where their business is, where it could possibly go, what the compliance requirements are, what the land capability is, and what everything else they can do there. So actually providing a holistic service in terms of what the financial business can do, what it can do, what it must do in terms of its environmental regulatory requirements, and then other things it could deliver in terms of new environmental services, I think is really kind of crucial. You've got to put it all together because that's where the viable business is in terms of what can happen on that land.
In terms of the money, is there something that really, as consumers, we need to look at as well to make sure that the large players and supermarkets and what have you are actually paying slightly more to farmers to actually make sure that there is the sort of actual money in the business to do this? Ultimately, we all need feeding. And if, you know, if you're buying your vegetables or you're buying your meat or your milk or what have you, whichever of the products that are coming from UK farming,
yeah,
and you're paying, you know, and effectively the profits are all going to Tesco or Sainsbury's rather than actually the farmer getting a fair cut. It feels to me like that there might be, it might be something very difficult for us to challenge on this, and a lot of it seems to come down to money.
I think, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, carry on.
No, carry on.
I mean, getting a fair price is absolutely key within all of this. And, you know, the supply chain is a very complex thing indeed. And how one negotiates for that and how the consumer can act within that is very difficult. Consumer can make choices. I mean, you know, there's ones which is supporting local farms without a shadow of a doubt. There's ones where you can do within the council, which is public procurement. So making sure that the food that is procured, you know, whether it's in the schools, hospitals, or whatever else, comes from, you know, kind of starter as kind of British food, but perhaps it comes from your locality. So decisions like that. The other one is making sure that the supermarkets themselves are held to account. So when they actually have all of their labelling there, that it actually applies. So where something says that it is British, it actually is British. So you're supporting in there. And in terms of getting more of the money back to the farmer, we're always desperately trying to do that. We don't have the ability to do a price negotiation every few years, and it's a problem. Shadow of a doubt.
I've probably got some more questions, but I can see so many other hands, so I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I've got Kate, and then I'll go to Paul, and I see Jill's indicated, so in that order. Kate, Paul, and then Jill. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, my question probably is for Jill, actually, because we did a terrific county farm visit to Newent, and they were talking about being carbon zero by Christmas Eve. I'd be quite interested to find out whether they achieved that. But that there was a specific thing they did talk about with carbon capture and silage, something to do with the way it was stored or moved or something. I wonder if Jill knows any more about that. So best practice, really.
Hi, Kate. Yeah, it was. They were hoping to be carbon neutral by Christmas 2024, as opposed to this Christmas. But they are on their way. They are on their way. It is very difficult. Just if we stick with the carbon thing at the moment, and I just want to go back to something that Paul was saying, just to reinforce. What they were talking about was about producing carbon neutral beef. And a lot of that was in terms of the silage that they were using, and also it was about manure storage and actually using that more effectively, so that actually the goodies that they were coming in meant less emissions coming out, and actually you've got the gap in terms of positive carbon and neutral carbon and negative carbon actually lessened. So in terms of good practice, that there are all sorts of things that farmers are doing at the moment. As Paul said, you know, farmers are working to very high standards. They are endeavouring to achieve our net zero targets as quickly and as efficiently as we can. But there are constraints and there are restraints in terms of how quickly they can do these things, the financial implications of these things. It's not an easy task. And as has been referred to previously, this is the most challenging period in agriculture, probably since CAP came in the 70s. You know, it is a really difficult time for farmers to actually be farming, and they are having to be agronomists, vets, technicians, mechanics, farmers, accountants. You know, it's not, there isn't one stream in farming that you can hang your hat on. There's an awful lot of differences, and I think a lot of our farmers are trying to look at different ways of farming. A lot of farmers, and again, this will impact upon fertilizers into rivers. A lot of farmers have reduced their fertilizer usage. One, because of cost. Fertilizer prices have risen significantly over the last couple of years. But two, a lot of farmers are going towards sort of min-till, so minimal tillage, so not ploughing up the ground as much, using more effective use of manures. But again, not every farm can do this, and it's really important to stress that individual farms have individual capabilities and constraints. So there's no quick fix there's no one size fits all. I think that's really important to say. I think that hopefully the slurry investment scheme will provide some finances to actually assist with farmers ensuring that they have got sufficient capacity. But it is a difficult one. Farmers do not have money to simply start throwing up new buildings and start enlarging slurry lagoons. It's very difficult. And from the county council's point of view, again, there is a significant financial implication to that as well. And, you know, if I was to be granted, you know, £1 million, it probably wouldn't do everything that every farmer wants across the estate. You know, that it's a huge investment. It really is a huge investment. So in terms of just going back to the funding side of things, there have been some funding opportunities available through the government. There has been some free advice sessions that farmers have been able to get onto. I appreciate not everybody has managed to take advantage of this, but certainly there were some opportunities where farmers could get a free half-day consultation on their holdings to look at how they are going to transition their business through to the new phase and a reliance away from BPS onto ELMS. Not every farmer will survive. I think that's important to say. With or without this sort of funding, not every farmer will survive. As Paul said, you know, 58% reliant on BPS. Now that amount of money is being cut, and even the most efficient farmers, some of them cannot cut their costs anymore. Costs are rising. So I think in terms of what we can do to try and help, and I've banged this drum for a long time, it's about buying seasonal, buying local, buying from your local farm shop, and looking at ways that you can directly help the farmer. Influencing supermarket prices is incredibly difficult. There is a whole chain of command there that actually we have very little input on. We can absolutely try, but there is an awful lot of work to do to ensure that farmers get paid a fair price for their products through the major supermarkets. Ideally, if you can, we need to be buying the local food. I go back to the comment made about ensuring that we as a county council actually support local farmers. Things like the dynamic purchasing system that's been raised before, that we've discussed before, that sort of thing, ideal, using our county council farms and other farmers within the authority to actually provide the food for our schools, our hospitals, etc. Absolutely, it's a no-brainer if we can do that. I think it's sorting out the mechanics of actually making that happen. Certainly the desire is there, and there are now steps in place to actually undertake some of these things. It's actually just fitting all of those mechanics together. So I think there are a number of opportunities, but it's not an easy route.
Chair, can I come back for a second on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, you mentioned, as I was going to, about seasonal and local and all those sorts of things. It's really, really important. But I think we all need to think about more plant-based way of life anyway, and not necessarily saying everybody needs to not eat certain things, but if people do, they certainly need to reduce them. But I completely agree. And Gloucestershire should and could be self-sufficient. It's a very nutritious type county. You know, we've got the farms and whatever, and the rewilding as well. I think there are programs coming forward for these sorts of things where we get that balance, and farmers are paid properly to do the right thing. I mean, traditionally, government has given money for farmers almost to do the wrong thing. I don't want to get too sort of into that now, but I do think that yeah, the farm should be providing for the hospitals, the schools, councillors, whatever, you know, when we're on site, etc., etc. So, but it's huge, and I think we do appreciate that there is a massive shift, and some of these practices really do need to change. And hopefully with Elms there will be, you know, for some people there will be a transformation, and it will suit the farmers, the people, the land, the planet, all of it, you know, on the positive side. I think really that this, for me, this presentation today has just opened yet another can of worms. You know, it's everybody's responsibility. There's plastic, and there are what we buy, you know, every single purchase that we make. It's really, really important. And you know, as is the sewage, as is the planning, as is you know, what the farmers do, as is, it's just enormous, isn't it? But everybody does have to play a part, and we can't just keep having people speaking and them saying, well, we're doing our bit, but it's this, and then the next one say, well, we're doing our bit, but it's that. Somehow we've got to get everybody in the room together at one stage and say, right, what changes are we all prepared to make? And that's all of us, you know, as consumers as well.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, and obviously I agree. I like the self-sufficient Gloucestershire bit in particular. Paul, you've been waiting a long time. Agriculture is a big subject, as the other Paul said. I suspect you'll be bringing us back onto the water side of this as opposed to the farming side.
Yeah. Well, a bit of both, I think. Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for the presentation. Obviously, I suppose what I'm sort of interested in really is I can hear the various sort of what I call carrots rather than sticks being talked about. But, you know, we've got an example locally, haven't we, in the River Wye, where there has been a lot of pollution caused by intensive chicken farming there. With all the issues going into the River Wye, and there's a lobby group that's very vocal on that. So really interested to understand, given that is alleged, I mean, I don't know the full story, but that is alleged, you know, are those who are polluting rivers, are farmers being taken to task for that? Are there, as well as the carrots you've described, are there sticks, in other words, that can be used to say you will not pollute these rivers? There is a consequence, and the consequence is X. Well, what is the consequence? I'm trying to understand that, really. Or should there be more of a consequence? And I suppose, you know, is there anything else that this council could do in addition to the sticks? Is there anything else that the council could do that's positive, that wouldn't break the bank, which could help tenant farmers, you know, clean up some of these practices?
I'll answer those ones for you.
Yeah, by all means, Paul. Yeah.
I mean, so farmers do. I mean, so there are the Environment Agency employs environment officers who will go out and make inspections, and so they will have, as their first thing, will be responding to incidents, and so they will get categorized, category 1, 2, 3, and 4, and depending on the severity, it might or might go to court. In general, for many of these issues, they're not dealt with going through court. So taking, for example, an area which was, I mean, it's quite a large study and is quite well known within the sector, is where the Environment Agency down on the Axe in East Devon and Dorset prioritised about 100, 110, 120 dairy farms to go and make inspections on. On those farms, they found high levels of non-compliance with the SAFO regulations for slurry stores and things. And an awful lot of that was because the farmers themselves wouldn't have been able to make that judgment call that there was a significant risk there. The point that I kind of go to this is all of those farms would have received a letter in the same way that your poultry farms would receive a letter from the regulator in terms of what is required. The regulator's letter states what is needed, and the farmer has to respond. With those farms that had to make changes, there was something like £4 million worth of investment put in across that catchment, and there were zero enforcement or zero prosecutions carried out. And I suppose the key thing is making sure that the regulator gives an appropriate amount of time and is pragmatic about how these things are done. In terms of where support can come from yourselves within all of this, there's such a breadth of support required. So partly it's helping, I mean, I categorize things as rules, tools and roles. Farmers definitely need good advice around all of this across the breadth of what they do, whether it's business planning, new opportunities, land capability, compliance, new schemes, how they will all work together, all of those kind of things, through to support for capital items on the farm. So whether they're investment in new infrastructure, things like that. I expect a critical part, and something that perhaps is in the gift of for you to give, is around how other systems work, like planning. So where farmers are required to put in a new piece of infrastructure, that actually there is a balance carried out and we can move to a position of betterment, but also where a farmer is moving out of a particular sector, that actually they can convert their business for another use. So it's thinking about things in a much wider context, I expect. Hopefully that did a few of your questions anyway.
Yeah, no, thank you. If I could just probing on one point you made there, you talked about capital items for farms as an example of how we could help. Can you give us an example of what sort of thing?
Oh gosh, it can be everything from cattle handling systems. They're very important, through to managing off water courses, so fencing and things like that. Could actually be around provision of, we've just done a scheme with, and I know you folk as well have done one around tree planting. We've just given out 90,000 trees across the southwest. So perhaps even some grants around tree planting in marginal areas. They're not, massive fields, but maybe as buffer strips around woodlands. Through to things like capital items like slurry storage, guttering. So if you put in improved guttering, then all of that water that's coming off the roof doesn't go on the yard, doesn't mix with all of the excreta that has come off of all the cows, and therefore doesn't end up washing away. So even things like that are really important. But we can certainly work with you around, you know, what should be in or what could be in a good capital grant scheme.
Thanks, Paul. I've got Graham, unless Jill wanted to make a point on something that Paul's just. I'll take Jill first, if you don't mind, Graham, and then because it might be related.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to pick up on that point, in that for those who didn't come to the farm visit day, we actually, as part of our management, we actually pay for FWAG to undertake various assessments on our farms, and that could include, at the moment, it includes stewardship applications. A lot of that includes some of those capital grant items that Paul was just referring to. So a lot of our tenants have taken advantage of ditches, watercourse management, planting of new hedges, trees, fencing against rivers, etc., etc. So in addition to those sorts of capital items that actually help facilitate ease of management on the farm, such as cattle handling systems and improvements to buildings, gutters, etc. So there is quite a lot of that going on the estate at the moment through the existing stewardship schemes. Obviously, they will change as we go forward, but there is quite a lot of work already going on that.
Thanks, Jill. Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My point is follow on from Paul Hodgkinson, really. The situation in my area is, obviously, you know, the River Wye flows alongside of the Forest of Dean, and we've had some very, I sit on that AONB, and there have been some very serious problems with the Wye, as you probably know, as Paul's already mentioned. And a lot of it's not in this county, it's neighbouring counties of Herefordshire, which is a very high farming county. And some of it is obviously what goes on the fields and runs off into the river, where there's like some of these phosphates and whatever. There's lots, some of the soils in Herefordshire have got high levels of that anyway. So no doubt it's reasonable to suggest that people can do work on getting the balance of that right. But other things that they tell us that is causing problems is intensification of poultry farming in that county and on up through the upper reaches. And I don't know, I'm guessing this would come into planning realms where if you have a very high number of poultry establishments in one area and it's near that river and it's causing problems, and there needs to be something planning wise looked at with regards to that. But be interested to know what Paul Cotton's thoughts on that would be, to be honest with you. Thank you.
I mean, it's all about managing risk at the end of the day, and it's about managing cumulative impact. One of the things that is difficult from someone putting in a planning application point of view is knowing what else is being passed, what else is being produced everywhere, and the cost in terms of working that out is exceptionally high in terms of doing all those reports. It's not that they might not need to be done, but it's being able to do it with some understanding that, having gone through the process, there is a little bit of not certainty that you're going to get the planning application, but at least you've got a fair chance. And I think that's one of the concerns that people have at the moment going through the planning system, because everything is changing. The way we do our regulations is changing, how they interact with planning changing, you know, and as Jill said, you know, this is the biggest change in all of our lifetimes in terms of how all these systems work. So I think we've got to be mindful of that. And it is, yeah, it's being pragmatic. I think it's giving a clear process. I mean, that's what people want, is a clear process to know what good looks like, and then having some understanding that if they meet all of those thresholds, they will get their planning application through. But I mean, where you're putting in new planning applications, please give people as much guidance as possible, make it as clear as possible, and give them as much access to data as possible around all of this. And that way, everyone produces quality applications. And then where there are issues with direct pollution, I mean, at the end of the day, there is a regulator, and that is the regulator's job. And, you know, they need decent monitoring around all of that, in river telemetry, etc. But also the farmers, the rules are changing, the bars are changing. They need the advice and guidance to be able to help know that and to be able to make the changes. So Joe, again, I think you mentioned something around FWAG. I mean, FWAG do very good, you know, on-farm events, and also do walkovers for farmers, you know, helping people get access into things like that. It's really, really crucial.
Thanks, Gray. Yeah, from what I've just been reading, the campaign group are insisting there's probably about 20 million birds in the Wye and Severn catchment. I don't know about the 20 million, but certainly intensive.
Well, the problem for us in Gloucester, Chair, is not in our county. It's in counties higher up the reaches of the river, and it's causing obviously major problems in that river, which is a beautiful river with a lot of wildlife, as you know. And it's not like the Severn; it's far different, and it's suffering quite badly. You know, down in the lower reaches, which is obviously, it's like Paul said, there's got to be overarching bodies that look at this in the in the bigger concept, really, because it's beyond Gloucester's issues.
Yeah, I'm looking around. I haven't seen a raised hand, but David Willingham, you did say you had a few more questions anyway, so I'll come back to you and then see if anyone else indicates.
I think you've got Councillor Hurst and Councillor Williams before me.
Okay, let's. I'll be gentle. Let's take Councillor Williams first, and then Steve, and then I'll come back to you. Then David, thank you for spotting that.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. I must apologise for all the technical difficulties earlier. I am the County Councillor for Bisley with Lickley and Painswick, and it's a predominantly rural area, many farms, lots of streams. There were just a few observations I wanted to make, and thank you, Paul, for such a brilliant presentation, very informative. In terms of the subsidies, as a farmer myself, I think that the general perspective really is that the subsidies are for the farmers, when actually in reality it's to subsidise the public. The cost of food is kept artificially low because the farmers actually get these subsidies. So that was just sort of one comment, and we all need to support our local farmers, and as Kate says, keep it local, keep it seasonal. But I know that a lot of Climate Action Network groups are now reaching out to the local farmers, and particularly in my area, we're going to have a meeting of all the local farmers to actually look at ways that the community can help that farm, putting in extra trees, hedging. There's also going to be people at these meetings that will be able to offer informal advice with regard to funding and ways of improving our practice. And I really don't see why Gloucestershire can't really be a beacon of excellence when it comes to farming, making sure that our rivers are protected. And sorry to waffle, but my main question was, with regard to the satellite monitoring, does that actually pick up any of this pollutants that are going into the streams, and the environmental agency can react quicker? Or, how does that work? Sorry.
So on the satellite side of things, so the Environment Agency does use satellite data in order to help them. So what they will do is they will use the satellite, and then well, first of all, they will go along and check when they go to a farm to see whether or not something like a slurry store or silage was when it was produced, because you can obviously see these kind of things, and where the farmer says, oh, this was made pre-91, then it can obviously, you can see if in 1995 there was nothing there, then there's an issue there. So the Environment Agency uses it for some of its roles around like SAFO. But on direct pollution, obviously the satellite can't see what's in the rivers, that's where telemetry is, but they will be able to note things like bare soils and runoff and pathways. And they actually, I think around your area, have contacted farmers where they've noted that there's a high risk for a pollution event, and they've particularly done that where they've noted that there might be a weather event coming in, and so giving people fair warning. So more and more that kind of thing is being used. From my point of view, I mean, I would love to get hold of all of that data, but it's exceptionally expensive to get. So, I mean, it has got a role without a shadow of a doubt, and you can use it for doing things like finding flow pathways and where issues will be.
Okay, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The more we get into this subject of polluted rivers, the more interesting it becomes, doesn't it? And particularly this morning, we're talking about farming, farming just down the road, as it were. The regulations must be, well, it must be huge, the number of regulations which govern farming. And obviously there are more coming in as time goes along. Can I ask who actually ensures compliance and enforcement of the farming industry? And is it really possible to enforce a good percentage of farms?
Do you know what? It's probably one of the most on-point questions for the moment in terms of how compliance is done.
Yeah.
I mean, so it will fall under different competent agencies. So Natural England's got a role, the Environment Agency's got a role, as does DEFRA and some of the, the departments like AFA, the Animal, Plant and Health Authority. So different competent agencies will have a role within it. And obviously they're dependent on their resources in terms of how they can go out and do things, which is why the Environment Agency is looking at using exactly as Susan said, around using things like satellite data. The other kind of pushes around things like earned recognition, which is part of what I'm doing around Poole Harbour, where the farmers to be part of our scheme will have to do self-assessment of compliance using an Environment Agency's tool to check their compliance against existing regulations. And they will be given a certain time frame in order to get compliance. Farmers who are in assurance schemes will have to show compliance. So Red Tractor, which is guaranteed, if you want to have an argument in a farmer meeting, we start talking about Red Tractor. It's a beautiful one. But Red Tractor has inspectors that go out as part of their assurance, and they will check for compliance across a number of things, including things like, is your slurry store up to standard? Yeah. Through all the way through to the supply chain. So, farmers who are supplying into various supermarkets will have requirements in terms of what they need to do environmentally. So it comes in an awful lot of different ways. And I think, as you kind of pointed out right at the very beginning, it's incredibly complex. You've got these environmental ones all the way through to, keeping, the footpaths open and everything else, through to doing your tax regime and making sure you've got the right kind of employment things going on. It's incredibly complicated, which is why, personally, it's why I do this job. I'm not a farmer. I don't have that skill set, but I'm passionate about helping them and giving them a fighting chance.
I always thought, though, that the Red Tractor scheme was an indicator that the food was wholesome.
It probably has got a little bit on that. I mean, it is certainly, it is British at that point, but it also has a number of standards in terms of what the farmer is expected to do in terms of management of their stock crops, etc.
Thank you.
Thanks. Right, I'm going back to David now. Then, David, thank you for your patience.
That's fine. Thank you, Chair. I was just trying to. There's some interesting points that have come out of this. So I was thinking about this. We're saying about planning, and obviously, county does some planning applications, and I guess in respect of the things that it does planning for, it also has planning enforcement. But districts, the 6 districts, also do planning and planning enforcement, which would sound like if we're going to tackle things through that process, we need to make sure that there's good join up between 7 different planning authorities that have the potential to take action. And as trying to think who it was that said it, I think it was Councillor Morgan said that a lot of the pollution that gets into the River Wye is coming from upstream and out of county. So I guess the question then is, whose responsibility within our county is it to make representations to the planning authorities upstream to make sure that applications that would damage Gloucestershire, rivers in Gloucestershire, are properly conditioned and properly monitored, because ultimately we're not planning authority for there. So that's one thing which I'm not sure if anyone any of our guests could answer, but it would be something that we need to take away. The other question which maybe we can answer, which is from the guests, is one of the things that we've been talking about in urban areas is smart cities. And I know that there's been a lot of investment in technology in farming and agriculture as well. There's a whole plethora of issues, and I wonder whether or what we could do on part of the farm estate that we've got to see if there's any demonstrations of how we could monitor the water quality, how we could use technology to effectively try and show what can be done, maybe with, maybe it's something to work with academia. So whether it's the Royal Agricultural College, one of the universities in the area, looking at technology and how these things fit together, because sometimes that sort of synergy might be really good. So if you've got pollution monitors in the water around the farms, or in the water courses around the farms, if you've got sort of Internet of Things technology monitoring all sorts of things that can be monitored, is there something we can do that reduces pollution, helps the crops, or helps the livestock, etc., etc., etc.? And is that something that we as a council could almost look at pump priming with academic partners on our farm estate? And is it viable? I asked the question because I'm a technologist by background, but I'm not into agriculture, and therefore I don't know the answers. I know there might be something that we can do, but I just wondered.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as the line goes, you can't manage what you can't measure. I mean, obviously that's not applicable across all cases. And as you pointed to there, we're going through the fourth industrial revolution, which is all about data and the Internet of Things. And it's one, we got to help farmers get up to speed on these new forms of software. Some are finding it difficult even with your pen and paper, and now we're moving across to some highly complex software tools. One of the things, I mean, there is an awful lot of good citizen science that goes on, and actually we did a project working with Bristol Water. We were helping inform farmers of metaldehyde levels in the waters around them, and then attributing that to certain weather events. And the more people have access to data related to what's happening on their farm and what is happening to their farm, the easier it is for people to take management actions, which sort of goes to what Susan was saying about, how satellites and things can be used. I think actually helping farmers do their own on-farm water quality testing would be really helpful, because that can be done voluntarily. You can do that for things like turbidity, so phosphates would show up in that, and you can also do it for things like nitrate, so you can see what's going on there. So giving people tools like that and actually making them tech where they don't necessarily have to go out and do it themselves, but it's coming into the farmhouse and giving them that data, will certainly give a lot more chance for being able to identify when a problem is maybe going to, trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit before. For me, the issue is it gets to the Environment Agency, and then the Environment Agency is going along. So, use of technology is absolutely key. For me, things like, I mean, we're working with folk developing nutrient accounting tools, absolutely key, helping people know that kind of thing. And then maybe one day we'll get a standardized carbon accounting tool, because there's a million of them around at the moment.
Thanks, Paul. Jill wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, actually, just your last comment, Paul, there was basically what I was about to say. So there are so many different tools out there at the moment. It is very difficult to provide a commonality in terms of benchmarking. So whilst we can look at undertaking numerous studies, and we have now linked up with the Agri-Tech Hub at Hartbury. So that is something that we are looking to try and progress. Again, it's about finding the right firms to match them with the right farmers. It's like a dating agency for tech and farmers, which is a bit bizarre. Doesn't always work, but it is something that we are looking to try and do. So hopefully, coming on board over the next 12-18 months, we will start to see some more tech being utilised on farms. And the aim with that is that actually we will have a firm coming in who has a service that they wish to offer, but actually what they don't have is the land on which, or the rivers on which to trial it. So what we can try and do is provide the facility whilst they provide the tech. And that's the idea, is to try and match relevant parties up. So taking on board your comments, that is absolutely something that we want to do, but it will take a little bit of time again whilst we're in transition of doing this.
In terms of the tech, that sounds like something that could almost be linked to some of the potentially startups that might consider using the either the Cheltenham Cyber Central or the Minster Innovation Exchange. Cheltenham's obviously very urban area, but it's surrounded by some wonderful agricultural land, and that might be another opportunity for those companies to find A, the people that do tech, and B, the places to trial that tech. And I think from the council's point of view, if we can look at whether any of that can improve water quality in rivers through monitoring and runoff prevention, or at least detection, so that you can work out what's causing it and what have you, that would seem to be another really good synergy that could promote the economics of the area, but also the sort of objectives we've got as well. So thank you. That sounds really good.
Thanks, David. I see Sue's hands up. Is that a legacy hand, Sue, or are you looking to come back in?
Could I just ask another question?
Yeah, by all means. Carry on.
With regard to the hub at Hartbury, do you think they'd be open to either coming and having a chat with us, or for us to visit them, so that we can get a really good understanding of what they do?
I'll run that past members at the end, because I was going to ask members about another session we want.
Apologies, Bill.
No, that's okay. It's not a problem, because as I've said to Paul, as in Paul Hodgkinson, there was a late start date, and we don't need to rush the finish date, because I want to make sure we get just about everything in that we can. That's why I'm going to be asking a question at the end of this session.
Thank you.
I don't suppose Paul or Jill will be able to answer for Hartbury College, but it's something we'll put on our discussion afterwards, if you like. Okay.
Chair, if I may, it's certainly something that I'm happy to raise with them. I'm sure, without speaking out of turn, I'm sure they would be willing to have a chat about other opportunities outside of the standard farming sort of forum.
Yep. Thanks, Jill. We'll pick that up at the end of this session. I'm just looking for any other questions in relation to Paul and Jill, really. Members, are there any other questions? No? Okay. Well, that's timely. Paul, firstly to you, thank you for the area you've given us. It's probably helped us pose more questions than perhaps we've got answers. But having said that, it's set the scene for where the NFU and agriculture in this. Thank you very much for your time and for attempting to get your presentation. And likewise, Jill, thank you for joining and for listening. And we might well take up your offer shortly in relation to Hartbury College. I'll sort it out with members in a minute. Thank you. Okay.
We'll just wait for Max to end the stream before you go into work planning, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Shirley and Paul are gone. Yeah. And Rebecca's out.
I can still see it. Is it left your screen?
Oh,
is it?
back up. Yeah.
2 seconds. I'll just give Max a call because I know he's doing 2 streams at the moment.
How to be so skilled in technology. Be good to go.
You have been removed from the meeting. This call will now be disconnected.